What's up, guys, and welcome back for another EVE Online solo mining episode. I'm out here today in the Skiff. Figured I would take the Skiff out. It used to be one of my favorite ships until the balance pass for mining. It is now one of the slower aligned ships, but figured I'd just kind of take it off and take it out and dust it off a little bit, let you guys see kind of like the yield and everything. We'll kind of talk about mining, but today we're going to be answering some questions I've gotten and just kind of circling around about the different types of things you can do in terms of mining, and what you should do with the product that you're mining, and how the ships have changed over the past year or so, and kind of what makes each one better or more useful in certain situations. Since we're out with the Skiff today, I kind of want to talk about that. I, for a long time, use the Skiff as my daily driver for solo, for Merc, and for a bunch of other stuff. But since it lost one of its mid slots in the balance pass, and since it got slower align time, it just hasn't made any sense for a lot of things. You can still take it out for high second stuff. You're very tanky. Chances are you probably won't be targeted, especially if you're on a belt with other more susceptible targets. So that is a bonus. But in terms of yield and having come off grid a lot, it's just one of those ships that is nice for protection, but not necessarily for the bottom line, so to speak. You're better suited to run like a procurer because they're just cheaper overall. Now, I'm a big believer that all the mining ships, even when you get to like max skills for mining, all the mining ships fill a different certain roles depending on where you're mining, what you're mining, kind of the situation, and it kind of is divided across many factors. One of the biggest factors would be your budget, for instance, depending on how much you want to spend. And by budget, I mean like the cost of the hull and the fit versus what you're actually doing, which would be like a cost-benefit analysis. And I really kind of divide that into three different categories: low, mid, high. The ships in the low budget sector end up being like your venture, your expeditionary frigates, like your prospect and your endurance. And then your mid tier would be the barges because of their hull cost and what it takes to fit them. And then large budget would be your exhumers and your porpoise and the orca and rorqual and things like that. Once you kind of figure out where you want it to be for budget wise, for like low, you have, between the venture and the prospect and the endurance, you have the option of fitting those for ore, gas, ice. In most cases, the endurance is going to be better for ice because it has better roll bonuses. The venture is good for ore and gas, and then the prospect is good for ore and gas as well. So that's kind of how that's divided out. And those can be taken in places like Poshman, low sec, even high sec. I usually don't take the low budget stuff into null sec or things like that just because of the size of the rats that exist there. It can end up being more of an annoyance than anything and you'll be moving more into like mid-tier budget for that kind of thing as well. And most of the times in low budget, you're going to not be boosted by an orca or a porpoise. Once you kind of move into mid-tier, where you're looking at mining barges and things like that, you're not only looking at the different types of things you could be mining, whether it be ice, gas, or ore, but you're also looking at your situation. Are you being boosted? Do you want convenience? And I usually break this into like several different categories, depending on what I want to do. And that is convenience, yield / range, and tank, and then just speed. Speed would be like getting off grid, align time, things like that. Tank would be like really high EHP, whether it be omni tank or specialized tank for certain types of ships. And convenience would be more or less your not having to come off grid a whole lot, so large mining holes and things like that. And then laser range and yield, that would be for ships that would be complemented very well with the booster, like a porpoise or an orca. And the different barges kind of fall, you probably pretty much guess how the barges kind of fit into those different categories. Like the retriever would be convenience, the The procure is like the tank, and tank can also kind of speed, and then your coveter would be like your range and your yield. So if I know I'm going to go out, if I want mid budget and I know I want to go out with a porpoise, then I'm going to probably take the coveter. And there are also situations where I want convenience, but also being boosted as well. So there's some crossover there where you can take like a retriever out with a porpoise or something like that. Procures are good, without if you're not going to take out a boosting alt, but procures are really great. And this also kind of extends to the high budget stuff too. So when you get into consumers, the same is true for like the Mackinac being convenience and speed. Actually, it shifts over. You have the procure in the barges, which is like speed tank, whereas like the Mackinac is more like convenience and tank and speed, because the Skiff is so low in getting off grid and things like that. Its tank is really good. I would still class the Skiff as like more tank oriented, because it can fit more tank than the Mackinac. But then the Mackinac, if you compare like the EHP of like the Skiff versus the Mackinac, and you add in like the convenience factor, and also take away the speed factor from the Skiff, that's why the Mackinac ends up looking really well. It looks really good at the high tier budget. And then the Hulk is, just like the coveter. If you're going out with an Orca, a porpoise, then you're going to go out there with a Hulk and get really good range, and you're going to get really good yield. Now, in terms of like what you're mining, whether it be moon, ice, or whatever, these ships can pretty much fit anything that you need, and you just have to kind of pick whether you want that convenience, that tank, that speed, or that range / yield. And you can fit any of them to do gas mining, or moon, or ice. And really, when it comes down to ice, I used to take Hulks, because you want be dragging like an Orca through a ice belt, so you can compress as you go if you need to, or just the size of the Orca's hold allows you to kind of go out there, and even if you're not compressing, if you're just dragging through the anomaly, then you can kind of get a lot in one run. I've also taken out the endurance just solo, but that's in nullsec for ice too, but it ends up being just more trouble than it's worth in most cases. I really don't use the Mackinac too much in nullsec. Neither the Skiff really. Like for the exumer level of ship, the Hulk just does really well, because most of what you're going to be doing that's worth doing in places like nullsec is going to be like moon mining and going out and doing anoms for certain things for your manufacturing and ice. And those are all anomalies. Those are all situations where the rocks, the fragments, are really far apart. So you benefit a lot from the extra range that the Hulk gives, and the extra yield from having a porpoise or an Orca kind of on field. That's really kind of how I look at it. And every day when I get on and I look at what I'm going to mine or where I'm going to mine, then I kind of look at the different ships and kind of how I feel that day. If I really want to go out there and just gun mining in like high sec, I just want to like melt a few belts as fast as possible, then I'm going to load up everybody in Hulks. I'm going to get them in either an Orca if I really want to go really fast, or a porpoise. I'm just going to burn down belts like every 30 minutes. But if I feel like be more chill and I don't want to manage a bunch of accounts, then I might just take out the Mackinac, right? Or if I want to do Poshfan, then I'll break out the endurance or the prospect, depending on what I want to do. Prospect is really good because you can travel around Poshfan cloaked. So if somebody comes on grid while you're mining like Spud or Rakavine or something, you can just cloak and then just warp off to your bookmark, and they can't really see what direction you're heading as long as you cloak completely before you start moving. So it's a little bit more easy to be evasive. The endurance works with that too, but it has just an improved cloak. So if somebody comes on to the anomaly with you in Poshman, then when you cloak, you have to start moving at a reduced speed, and they can very, very easily kind of like track you, because you're not able to get off grid unless you drop cloak. So prospect is really nice. You don't have to really worry about rats out there too much. So the prospect is kind of good to go there. All right, we're gonna get into some question and answer for some of the stuff I've been seeing on the channel. And the first one, I kind of get quite a bit, and it's essentially, should you sell or build things. And I think this really depends on where you're at with your kind of mining career. If you're a new miner and you're still getting your alt skills up, then I think that it's probably best to compress all of the stuff that you mine and sell it. That way you have some capital to replace ships if you lose them. You also have just working capital. Manufacturing is one of those things that just because you have the materials, it's not just necessarily like a turnkey thing, especially if you want to be efficient about it. And it also depends if you're going to be doing it in player-owned structures or NPC or whatever. Getting into manufacturing and also is very skill intensive as well, because when you start really scaling manufacturing, you're going to want research slots, you're going to want reaction slots, and all that stuff is very much tied to skills. The other thing too is if you want to be able to research all of your BPOs to as close to 1020 as possible. So, and that stuff takes a crazy amount of time depending on what you want to build. I think that if you plan on doing manufacturing in the future, then selecting BPOs that you're interested in, getting them into the cooker and getting them starting to research while you're mining is a good move. You also kind of run the risk of potentially changing what you're interested in building by the time you kind of get the skills where you want them to be at. So I usually tell people to hold off. If you don't really care about plexing yourself or omega yourself through mining, you could essentially stockpile everything that you mine in compressed form, and when you start manufacturing, you'd have a good stockpile to start working with. And then you can actually like kind of set goals for yourself where you can look at your stockpile and you'd be like, oh well, I'm really high sec ore heavy, so you might spend a couple of weeks looking at rare ore sites for isogen, oxium, maybe go out there and finding some stuff with megaside, zydrine, and start rounding out your stockpile. That way when you start making things, you don't have a huge bottleneck either. And the reason I say compress it if you're stockpiling it, because if you decide to move systems, or if you find a good corporation and you need to move out to where they're at, then it's a little bit easier to move. And it depends on how much you're mining too. You could very easily get to the point where you have so much compressed ore that it would take you a long time to move it. That's why I usually tell people just to sell the compressed ore while they're kind of training into manufacturing, while they're researching BPOs. That way, if their location that they're mining changes, they're not having to move a whole lot of assets. And it's almost always easier just to go out and do the mining you need once the BPOs are ready to go. That way you can go out there and mine it, you can get a couple jobs started, and then while that job's running, you kind of fill your coffers again, as it were. The biggest thing about industry in this game is just keeping some working capital going. Definitely wanting to keep enough ISK on hand to either replace ships if you lose them, or if you add an alt, having the funds to either inject or get them ships to expand your operations. So I mean, it really kind of just depends on how you want to approach it. I would say probably 95 or more percent of the time, for most people, it's going to be better just to sell the ore while you're starting out until you're absolutely ready to build stuff. And if you don't care about manufacturing at all and you never want to get into that, then you're going to make better money, faster money. I mean, you're going to get your wallet plussed up a lot quicker by just selling the ore and foregoing building things. But a lot of people I know actually do enjoy manufacturing because they like the gameplay loop. It's not always profitable. Sometimes it's really time consuming. You might build a lot of stuff and then you might have to just wait for the market to kind of come back around to you so you actually have good margins. So it's a lot of patience is involved. So in the beginning, you don't really have a lot of time to wait around to like try to have a decent amount of capital to work from. So it's probably better just to kind of sell that stuff until you're really kind of set up and you're in a good spot overall. Now the next question is, are mining implants worth it? And I did a video over this last week, and I talked about in that video about the situation that you'd want the harvest set or things like that in. You can dump a lot of ISK into implants. And the thing about implants is once you buy them and you inject them, or you put them on your clone, they're yours, right? There is no resellability there, so that those can cost, if you go a mid-grade harvest, that can be up to a 12 bill clone. In most cases, just regular everyday mining, the MX1005 will give you 5% yield, which I do recommend. I have that on all my alts. The Mitchie's excavation augmenter, which is another 5% implant, is expensive and probably in most cases not really worth it. And also the harvest set is very situation based. The harvest set is going to extend the range of your mining lasers, and so if you're doing moon mining in nullsec, or if you're doing anomalies or ice in nullsec, mostly nullsec mining, that's where the benefit of that long laser range comes in. And really only if you're mining with your own fleet, you have a porpoise out there or orca or whatever, and all your alts are following that booster and you're kind of dragging through. Having that higher laser range allows you to kind of stay on grid longer and maximize the amount you can do. If you're just mining without a booster, if you're just out there with like a procurer, then the harvest set is not going to do you any good, because you can just bookmark rocks, and then you could bounce to like a bookmark and bounce back and forth to rocks to get there quick. And also the mining holes on those ships are pretty small, so you're going to take multiple trips to kill a rock anyway, so having very long range, if you're not being boosted, if you don't have a fleet, is probably not worth it. And that's kind of the general rule that I tell people, is like, if you're interested in the harvest implant set, you need to be doing things like moon mining. Even moon mining in high sec, you can kind of not have to move around a whole lot, and you can reach different fractures without repositioning. And same thing with anomalies and for ice. But if you're not doing one of those three, then you really don't need the harvest set. You'll do just fine putting MX1005 on all of your mining alts, and then you put the mining form and mine link on your booster, and you're good to go. That's pretty cheap. Because the one thing you have to always realize too is, like, unlike ships or mods where if you don't lose them to being ganked or whatever, if you, like, say you're in mining barges and your whole fleet or whatever is in coveters, and you decide to upgrade them all to hulks, and you don't use the coveters anymore, then you could technically go and sell that stuff and kind of recoup some of that cost. Whereas implants, there's no resellability. Once you plug them into your head, they're yours. And committing to 10, 12 billion in a clone for multiple mining alts is a big investment, and that puts a lot of ISK on the field. And if somebody pods you, then that's can take a big hit out of your bottom line, unless you're just doing crazy amounts of mining. But I really doubt most people are going to be taking three clones or three miner clones out that are like 10 bill a piece and doing enough to realistically replace them if something happens. I mean, even on the low end, like with mids, it's like 10 bill, 3 clones, 30 bill in just non resellable stuff. If you go low grade harvest and you're looking more in the neighborhood of like 4 to 5 bill, but still that would, for 3 alts, that would be 15 bill. If everybody gets potted, in most cases, not every alt is going to get potted. You're going to get probably a good majority of them off, but it sucks to lose clones anyway. And it also just gives you a little bit more, take a little bit of the pressure off when you know that the clones are not necessarily the biggest thing that's on the field, because there's a lot of strategies where, like, even in high sec, where you can store a couple of hulks into the orca, and then you have to literally take the orca down to take those ships out. And there's another defense strategy. If you tank out your orca and they don't bring enough to kill it before Concord kills them, then you could technically just put those hulks or whatever into the orca, and then even if you're also left out there with the pods and they're only running like MX1005, even if they do get potted, then it's a lot less of a hit, because instead of, you're losing maybe like 140 or so million on the implant, as opposed to losing like close to 300 to 400 for the fitted hulk or whatever. So it really just depends on how much you want to min-max. And the harvest set is really just about how much you actually want to like have quality of life. Because even for me, I stopped using harvest even for like the moon and ice and stuff and null, because by the time I fill up, and especially if I'm compressing, by the time I fill up, I'm usually wanting to take a break anyway. So that means I can warp to the pause and then reposition again, and so it kind of lines up a little bit. So I think that it just definitely depends on like your situation with those kind of things. Now this leads basically to the next question very nicely, and it is, what is better overall, moon or gas or ice? Now I'm going to assume that better overall means more ISK per hour, and we look at it strictly on all of the moon, or all of the, all these things across multiple areas of space. Gas is going to be at the top of the list because it's just very, very valuable. And then I think the next on the list would probably be moon ore, and then probably ice very last. Now, I like to look at this kind of a question in terms of sustainability, because unless you're able to do a sustained amount of high ISK per hour, then it doesn't really mean anything if you have to hunt a lot for things. Now, the reason I actually put moon ore above regular ore is because if we think about everything, if you're looking at bonus fracs or R32 or R64 moons in nullsec, those are going to be very valuable. And if you look at all of ore combined, Merc is going to be the most valuable ore you can mine in nullsec, and that puts it really high up the list. And then ice is not bad, but its total value, compressed value on the market is pretty low now, especially what it used to be. But you don't necessarily have a whole lot of issues selling ice products like the isotopes and stuff, because it goes into things like fuel blocks. Now, what we should do is we should be looking at these 4 categories in the most sustainable way possible. So something that you can do very, very frequent, and stick a very high ISK per hour. Gas is always going to be very, very high, because most of the time you have to go into wormhole space, do scanning, go into low sec, and it's always going to be accompanied by scanning and competition and things like that. You'll spend a lot of time actually hunting for those things, and then when you find them, they're very profitable, but you're going to spend a lot of downtime that you could otherwise be doing something that's a little bit less lucrative for longer periods of time at higher volume. Moon mining is actually very, very sustainable. If you have a corporation that has multiple athanors and moon drills, you can even get to the point where you're doing 2 or 3 moon fracs a week, and basically be mining every day on that stuff because of how long the fractures last. And then periodically you'll get like bonus fracs, which are much higher value. In high sec, if we look at it in just terms of like space, in high sec, I think the most sustainable and the highest overall would be moon mining. And then I think ore would be like next to it, with doing like rare ore border sites and things like that. Ice is also present in high sec, but it's extorted to a great deal. So getting high volume of that without just getting annoyed by people bumping you is kind of an issue. So I would say like the best overall in high sec would probably be moon mining, definitely. In terms of null sec, I think it would still come down to moon mining. If you don't have a corporation that is doing moon mining, then it's going to be ore all day long because of Merc. Looking out for that Mercoxide, you could essentially mine every 3 days in a system because of how the spawn works and everything. But moon mining, if you have the established infrastructure for moon mining, it's still going to be better in nullsec as well. Low sec is going to be gas, because if you're living in low sec, then you can basically just sit in the system and scan SIGs as they pop up. And if it's gas, you can go out there and grab it. It becomes a little bit more sustainable. If you're not traveling, if you're living in null sec, it becomes a lot more sustainable, because if you have to travel into low sec to look for stuff, then you don't really know the area, so it can actually be a bigger time sink. So if you're living in null sec, then gas is still going to be number one. And then probably or you can pretty much moon mine everywhere. You can even moon mine in low sec. So moons are going to be pretty much, if we're going to look at just like all the empirical data across all areas of space, and look at it through the lens of sustainability, moon mining is very, very much worth it. But if you look at just strict like ISK per hour across all spaces, then it's going to be gas, right? But if you actually try to go and do a certain amount of volume of gas every day, then you're going to be spending a lot of time scanning, traveling, and it's going to end up probably giving you less per hour yield if you were just sticking it lasers on a moon, or doing Empire bore sites, or even ice in nullsec. So there's really no best answer here. It's very situational, depending on where you're at. If you're in nullsec with a corporation, or if you have your own Athenors with moon drills, then moon mining. That's why a lot of people, you see a lot of miners transition into moon mining later in their career, because moon mining will feed reactions and a lot of like high level manufacturing and stuff. So that's really where everybody tends to land. If you're more of a nomadic miner and you're like to travel to Poshman or wormhole space, then you'll be doing a lot of gases, you'll be doing a lot of ice, you'll be doing a lot of more of the like Merc in nullsec. So it depends too if you're like established somewhere, or if you're just kind of like a traveling around and stuff. But moon mining is still probably completely overall is probably the best thing to be mining. But if you don't play a whole lot, if you log in maybe a couple hours a week or something, then targeting things like gas or Merc is going to be overall better, because it's a lot more ISK for the time that you spend. But if you are a sustained player and you're playing for multiple hours a day, then you really want to like maximize the amount of time that you have lasers on rock. And if you have, like I said, if you have that infrastructure set up for moon mining, that's going to be your best bet. Otherwise, you're going to be looking at adding a lot of alts and clearing belts in high sec, or going out to nullsec and doing ice to flip it into blocks. And the other thing too about nullsec and ice and stuff like that, it's when you especially in nullsec, you start looking at like a lot of logistics, not just like time sinks. Like with gas, you're gonna be going around looking for gas sites as a big time sink. But like in nullsec, when you're doing moon mining or ice, you have to also think about the time investment for logistics, like getting the ice from where you're mining it to where you're potentially building fuel blocks or whatever. The best is per hour for mining is when you can mine in a system, compress it, take it to a station in that system, and either sell it or very quickly contract it off to sell to somebody when there's very little movement through space, through gates, and very little logistics getting stuff actually sold to a buyer. So with moon mining, you're going to need an Orca for compression if you want to actually sell the compressed ore. But most people who are doing that kind of moon mining are going to be building things. And if you're building things, it doesn't matter which one is better overall, because you're going to need everything. You're going to need gas, you're going to need ice, you're going to need the moon ore, the moon goo, all that stuff. But for the sake of this question, I would say overall, in my opinion, moon mining is the most sustainable, better overall option across all areas of space. Now, the next question I have is, what mining crystals should you use? And really, it comes down to the first thing you have to figure out is, do you want to use Tech 1 or Tech 2? I usually just train all my guys up to the point where they can just use Tech 2s, because they're just far more efficient and they don't burn out so much. I don't recommend ever using Tech 1s because it's so easy just to do the extra little bit of training and go into Tech 2. Then whenever you're looking at crystals, you essentially have three options. You have Type A, Type B, Type C. Type C is going to be low yield, very high waste. That's like the crystal you would use if you want to just delete rocks. Type B is going to be low cycle, and probably like, I would say low cycle, high waste. And then your type A would be your normal yield and medium waste. If you're doing anything like anything that's in a finite quantity, like Merc, well, Merc is going to have waste anyway, so I usually recommend type A's for Merc crystals, type A2s for Merc. If you're doing things like high seg belts where there's just a infinite amount of quantity and supply, go with B2s or type B2s, because lower cycle times mean you're going to get that ore into your ore hold so much quicker, and it's going to feel more fluid. When it comes to doing things like rare ore sites and stuff like that, use like a type A's, because you don't really want to take faction mods out there, which faction mods have zero waste, but it also, pumps up the target on your back a little bit. If you're in null sec and you're doing bonus fracs or stuff like that, then you want to use stuff that doesn't have any waste. And most of the time, in a lot of mining corporations, they won't even allow you to use crystals on really nice moons, because they don't want any waste at all if it's going all the way through the corporation. Which that kind of leads into the last question, and that is faction mods worth it? You can't go wrong using or buying ore harvesters or ice harvesters. Those are going to be great. I don't recommend using anything other than ore ice harvesters, because the regular Tech 2s are so horrible with a CPU. And ore harvesters have higher range, and so they pair really, really nicely with the harvest set implants. But they also are very expensive. So if you're doing moon mining, if you're in a situation you want zero waste and high range, then faction harvesters will do the job. As far as faction lows, the benefit you get from faction lows versus the cost are not worth it. I used to min-max and do crazy expensive Hulk builds with faction upgrades and faction harvesters, but the upgrades are just not worth it in the long run, and which is unfortunate, because they're nice if you really want to like kind of bling out a ship and kind of play around with it. They're fun, but when you're done using them and you're ready to sell them again, they're really hard to kind of offload, because a lot of people have already kind of decided that the faction harvesters are better. The faction lows are just a thing to pass on. But that's gonna be it for this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed watching the Skiff mine, and hopefully answered some questions and stuff like that. And hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.